I would like to dedicate today's class, Lilui Nishmata, to elevate the soul of Mrs. Lily Safra, Leah, the daughter of Dov HaKohen Vechana, Aleha HaShalom. She has been a matron of our lot. As you can see, her name is on many institutions, the one we're currently in, the one I teach in the city. She's been a supporter and has continued the dedication for Torah study and learning and Sephardic heritage that she and her husband had started many years ago. May her neshama have a beautiful aliyah, and may the beautiful work that they began be continued so that we could all be the beneficiaries of learning and praying and keeping our heritage together. So today we're going to learn Parashat Balak, and before we get into the nitty-gritty, before we get into the specific verses, I'd like to take a step back. I've been away for a few weeks, so I just want to bring us all in together to get a sense of where we are. It's hard to just drop a pin on page 856 and say, okay, press the gas and let's get moving. We need to have a little bit of a background where we've been so that we know where we're going. Parashat Balak is one of the most fantastical parshiyot that you will find in the Torah. It has everything from sorcery to speaking animals. It's exciting. It's the stuff that great cinema is made of. But for us, we have to take a step back and say, why is this story, and I'll give you a little cliff notes on the story, why is this story even here in the middle of our Bimidbar experience, in the middle of our desert experience? What happens is, just so everybody's on the same page, the Jewish people are camping. They're minding their own business. Out of nowhere, you'll see in the verses, this man named Balaq, who goes on to become the king, decides that we pose a deathly threat to his people and to the region. So much so that he uses terms that we are going to lick them up the way a cow licks and grazes in the fields. And he comes up with all this propaganda and creates a sense of hysteria amongst the people. Very much we're going to see the same way Pharaoh had done with his people, who he had created. Pharaoh had created this scenario that an enemy might come and attack them, and we would join with the enemy and fight against them, and they would be lost completely. So there is this anti-Jewish, anti-Bnei Israel sentiment clearly embedded. But if this was a story just to prove that point or make us aware of that reality, unfortunately, then we already have the book of Shemot to tell us that. We know that there are going to be regimes, and even before Egypt, we had seen it when Yitzchak made a lot of money and Avimelech and his people got jealous of him. There is this cycle. I think Parashat Balak is here not just to make us aware that we could be sitting, minding our own business, and people could come up with hypothetical stories of why we're such a threat. That may be one, but there is so much more. There's a depth to this parasha. One of the interesting things is it's not about us. We are on the scene. If they hired us to be actors, we wouldn't be saying a single word. It's not a story of us or about us. It is, but it's an indirect story. We don't play a starring role in our own story.
I want to ask you, are there many other narratives that we're actually not a part, or is this really a unique?
I can't think on the spot, but this is unique in the sense that the spotlight is on two main characters. Balak, who's the king of Moab, And Bilaam, who is, I'm going to use the word sorcerer. The commentaries go as far as to say that he was a prophet, and they say that his level of prophecy and intensity of prophecy was greater even than Moshe Rabbeinu. And they go and they say that whether or not it's the reality, they go to say that with an explanation, and they say that God didn't want the other nations to feel that we had a Moshe Rabbeinu and therefore we were moral and we understood what the path was for us to take. So he gave them a prophet as well. And this Bilaam, who we're going to meet today, is that prophet. But the interesting thing about this story is that everything is taking place without our knowledge. And reading it today, all these years later, we have to stop and ask ourselves, how many things, like you asked, is that the only story? I will tell you, my friend Katie calls me from Israel all the time. She's in the know, and she'll tell me, Vivien, you don't know what they found today. They found a bomb on a crowded bus, and they found it before it detonated. And all those people on that bus weren't even aware that the package that the secret Mossad guy took off with him was actually something that was intended to kill lives and limbs and create devastation. So one of the ideas that we need to be mindful of as we read this parasha, I believe, is how many close calls, how many bullets do we dodge literally every day that we're not even aware of. And if this story comes just for that purpose alone, just to say, Hashem hine lo yanum velo yishan shomer Yisrael, the God of Israel doesn't rest, doesn't slumber, he's never asleep at the wheel. And just because you're not aware, I always I have that vision of the Mr. Magoo, he walks off the bridge and the bridge collapses behind him and he keeps walking like nothing ever happened. And 4 steps later, a building falls. And then what happens? He's walking, not a care in the world. Like my mother would say, yallah, nothing's going on, just happily merry on his merry way, clueless to how many bullets he's dodging. And I think the Torah wants to tell us that. Just because things may seem rosy and cheery and calm, don't think that God is not busy being our iron dome. Don't think that he is not dodging all those bullets. That awareness is maybe one of the takeaways that we want to take from here. But there's another level. There's many layers, and we could try and uncover and unpeel as many layers as we can when we read this story. And I said I'd give you the cliff notes, so I'll do that quickly now. We have a king, and actually, you know what? I want to read it to you because the way the Torah develops the story tells 7 stories just in the first few lines. So let's look at them together. I always like you to have the verses and own them. Vayar Balak ben Sipor. I'm on verse 2 of chapter 22. It's the first verse of Parashat Balak. Balak, the son of Sipor, sees et kol asher asa Yisrael la'emori. He saw everything that Yisrael did to the nation, the Emorim. Now, we may not pay such close attention. This is a little bit of like an opening introductory sentence. It's not such a big deal. This guy, Balak ben Sipor, saw the devastation that we caused to the Emorim, except that the sensitive reader sees a whole story in just this verse. And what do I mean by that? First thing we have to ask ourselves is, who is this person, Balak ben Sipor? And I'm going to be a spoiler alert for a second. He's going to be introduced in a couple of verses as the king of Moab. And if you don't mind, if somebody is a king, the proper protocol is when you're introducing him to me in a written piece, he should be written with all his accolades. He should be introduced as His Royal Highness, His Majesty, King Balaq. But instead, we, the reader, senses he's only introduced as Balaq ben Sipor, and worse than anything, we don't even know who Sipor is. At least if he had some kind of lineage, maybe Sipor was somebody that we, to our knowledge, was an important person. He had, like you would say, a yichus. He doesn't have, not by his name, not by his father. This guy, excuse my language, for us, is a nobody. It reminds us of Vayhi bimei Achashverosh. We know that Achashverosh is the +1 to the throne. The real blue blood is Vashti. But we could never write that in the Megillah. So we jump through hoops to try to have the discerning reader recognize, I'm going to introduce him as just Achashverosh, so that everybody who's in the know understands. And why is that important? It's because we never know who our enemy is. We never know who's behind, who's the mastermind behind the agenda to terminate the Jews. It could be a nobody. And the scary part is the nobody who decides that his agenda is to terminate the Jews. What happens to him? He doesn't just become a somebody. What's out there in the world is that person somehow, it's a easy pass for them. It's a direct catapult for them to assume a position of power. Should I mention Hitler to you? I just want you to connect those dots for yourself. The Torah is telling it to us in black ink on white parchment. And it's saying, just by this introductory pasuk, it gets better, the rest of the verse, yes?
Just as you could be a nobody to do evil, you could be a nobody.
I love you. So Sonia, just for our Zoomers, could hear what she said, because she makes a beautiful point. Just like you could be a nobody for evil, you could also be a nobody to end up bringing salvation and to do greatness. And that, I think, is a beautiful message. We see that message very often in Torah. We just need one person to turn the tide. We just need one Mordechai who's going to say, no, I'm not bowing down. We need one person to take a stance. I think that's a beautiful message. I'm going to add to that, hopefully, by the time we get to the end. I just want to continue this verse so we see. So this Balaq ben Sipor, excuse my language, this nobody of a person, what does he do? He sees what Yisrael did to the Emori. Why is that so telling? Because what he sees, his viewpoint, his recording of the news, his headlines read, Yisrael destroys Emori. What's missing from the headlines? That's what you would see in the Moabite Post. What would the Jerusalem Post write? That God, two things. Oh, thank you. One, that it was defensive. Or two, what would you see? It would say, Baruch Hashem Yishtabach Shemo V'zichro La'ad Borei Olam, comes to the rescue once again, a ragtag team of Jewish people that have no military ability whatsoever, no weapons, no organization, no rockets, no nothing, is able to decimate the Emori. In his story, what did he do? In his cultural view of the Jews, he decided that the Jews are the bullies who destroyed the Emori, and he takes God, of course, completely out of the picture. We saw that with Paro. When Paro saw that the Jewish people left, he didn't see, what didn't he see? that Hashem was the one that took them out. And when you didn't see God in the picture, and you didn't see that God destroyed the Amoris, and you didn't see that God took the Jews out of the picture, and you isolate the Jewish people from their God, then you think that the Jewish people are vulnerable, because the Jewish people alone, we could attack them. The Jewish people with their God, nobody will dare attack. Yes. Yeah, but loud so they could hear.
Sorry, what year is this? So they just had the merit, where are we here?
Thank you. That was actually the first thing I intended to say, so thank you. We're in the 40th year. We've been in the desert for 40 years. We're on the cusp. We're already, so we know where Moab is. Moab, like Sedeh Moab from Ruth. It's literally a hop, skip, and a jump from Eretz Yisrael. You cross over the Jordan and boom, you're there. So where are we? We're in our 40th year. We served our sentence. We did what we needed to do. And you should know that the people who were going to enter the land, in the time of Yehoshua, they were at the highest spiritual level that our nation had ever been. And this is that same year. It's the 40th year of the Jews having been in the desert.
What was it that they had to battle? Was that because they didn't let them in the land?
So there were many different battles that we fought along the way. The purpose for today's parasha, that I believe, they say that Moshe Rabbeinu wrote the book of Devarim and Parashat Balak. Why do you have to tell me Parashat Balak? I know he wrote everything. Didn't God write everything for him? There's a story, there's a message that we need to take away. And I don't know that it involves so much the warfare and the strategies. I know Balak would like it to be about warfare and strategy, but there's something else going on. So we just read one verse. I just wanted to set a tone that the Torah is telling us who we're dealing with. We're dealing with a nobody. He came out of nowhere, thin air. His father's Sipor, who we never heard of him either. And his worldview is eliminating God from history. I'm using it in those terms. Unfortunately, today we're much more familiar with this.
Who is this, Balak or Bilaam?
Balak, the king, in the first verse is taking God out of the picture. As the story develops, we're going to see that Balak and Bilaam start in the same trajectory, but they're each going to go down a different path. And we're going to see what happens to each of them. And the reason we're learning the story today is because I believe the Torah wants us to understand a very pivotal point. Yes.
All those places that they went, were they all in Jordan, just different towns of Jordan?
They were all,
Like Moab,
I don't know if you want to call it Jordan, but they were on the other side of the Jordan River. Anywhere from Egypt in the south, we made sort of like a hook to go into Eretz Yisrael. So all of those towns,
So each was a different.
each was a
country.
different, you may call it a country or a different group of people, a different nation. Or they were either tribal, they were clans, or they were actually, some of them established nations.
A little hill, like Yericho, we always think is this big thing. It was like a little.
We were just there 2 weeks ago, and I was shocked to see that that was
No, they're
Yericho.
not cities. They're like cities, but they're really mountains.
Some of them, like she said, were just mountains where people lived in there. In that section, they gave themselves a name. Let me give you a little more information, because I do want to bring an important
Why
point.
would they even think of God anyway? They didn't believe in God, so why would they have to think about God?
Okay, that's very interesting that you should say that. I believe that they knew but wanted to reject the concept that the Jewish people, or more so the God of the Jewish people, was an all-powerful, almighty being. And the reason I say that, I'm going to show it to you here. Well, give me a few more minutes and then I want to get you into the
But
mindset.
they knew that in Egypt. I mean,
Yeah.
finally, Pharaoh finally said that it was God. who
And
did it,
word
So they must have gotten the word around.
Word travels fast. Yes, Amalek had heard about it. The nations, they say, in the book of Yoshua, there's a beautiful line where they say, Namogu, they're shaking, Kol Yoshvei Haaretz Mipenenu. The people that are living in the land are shaking, they're trembling from us. So they weren't so lost to the media because they didn't have what we have today. In a split second, you know what's going on the other end of the world. But word did travel. And the people did know that the Jewish people were a people. I mean, you had to have heard about them because they're a people who 1 minute ago were enslaved. And the next minute they took their oppressors and brought them to their knees, decimated the entire Mesopotamian region, which was the superpower of the world. From there flowed much of the commerce and everything else. So the people understood that the Jewish people have this, I'll use protexia, they have this silam, this shadow, they have a strength, they have a force, but they wanted to continue to reject the notion that there's a being that exists, that's a malchei hamelachim, that's above all of the Elohei ha-Elohim, who's the God. They did believe in gods per se, the God of the sun, the God of the moon, right? But this notion was something that they want, guess what? It shouldn't be so foreign to us, because even today, it's still trying to be rejected. People don't want to pledge allegiance to God or say anything that in God we trust. They're looking to cancel and erase that from the culture. And we have to get to the nitty-gritty of why that is. Why do
It was
people...
40 years. Did they start at the 40th year, knocking people out or towns out or whatever you want to call those groups out? Or was it in the last 10 of those 40 years?
So we're missing 38 years. It's funny you should ask. The Torah tells us the first year and a half,
Right.
38 years zippity-doo, we don't hear anything. And then the last year is when all of the action takes place, which is here in the book of Bimidbar. Steri, you want to say something and then I want to continue.
I'm a little confused. Isn't Moab from Noah?
Yeah, I'm so happy that you said that because I have it right here. The two nations that are going to, give me a minute because I'm going to put them together for you here in the next verse. So let me, yeah, Moab is Noah's daughter. So since Sarah asked it, let me just address that for now. The word Moab means me'ab, from my father. How does this nation come to be called from my father, me'av, from dad? It's because the daughter of Lot had become pregnant from her father. She gave, actually it wasn't Noah, it was Lot. She gave Lot wine to drink when she thought that the whole world ended and she wanted to repopulate the world. So Lot ends up having two children, one from his older daughter, one from his younger daughter. He has Ammon ben Ami. Am, my nation, the father of my nation, means my own child is from my father, Ben Ami, Ammon, and the other child is named Moav, Me'av, from my father. So one of the nations, since you mentioned it, what happens when the goal is to destroy the Jewish people? Even nations who are not allies are happy to come together for a common cause, right? The enemy, the friend, something of my something is my enemy, that's the one. So what happens is when Moab decides to cheer, to hold the banner, anti-Israel banner, who comes? Midian. Now, who's Midian? What do we know about Midian? It's Moshe's father-in-law. Moshe is one of them. But Midian is so happy to jump on the bandwagon to come and help the Moabites fight against the Jewish people, because that's how strong. Now, is it just the Jewish people, or is it what we stand for? Is it our God? What is it that creates this anti-Jewish sentiment? Could be jealousy. Let's go into the verses and see how the Torah develops it for us. Vayagor Moav mipnei ha'am. Every word here goes on the scale. Vayagor, these are words that we're going to see. There's a sense not just of dread, but a sense of disgust that comes when Moab has an emotion towards who? Mipneh Ha'am. We just last pasuk. What were we called? Yisrael. What are we called now? Ha'am. What happened to us?
Took away identity.
We lost our name. We lost our identity. We're no longer a people with a name. Maybe you want to say we're a number at this point, right? And what happens to when you're in the business of killing people, when you're in the slaughter business, you can't slaughter somebody with a name, but you take away their name and you call them an am, all of a sudden it just dehumanizes them a little bit more. Ki ravhu, because there's so many of them. Does it sound like Mitzrayim all over again? Vayakot Moav mipnei bnei Israel. So on the one hand, they have a hatred for us, so they take away our name. On the other, they hate us because of our name, because we are the children of Israel. And Moab tells Zikne, Midian, he has the alliance. Who's going to join forms? Who's going to join teams? Yitro and Lot, the Midianim and the Moabites. Moab goes and tells the elders of Midian, you know what's going to happen? I see it clear as day. This is the propaganda. You see, do you know what these people are going to do? They are going to lick up all of the surroundings the way that a shor, the way that an ox licks up the green of the field. And now you can see, now you're so smart. When you read these next few words, you know exactly how it came to be. And Balaq ben Zippor is the king for Moab at that time. Fill in the blanks for me. Because he's the one who's willing to carry the banner that we're going to destroy the Jews, and because he's the one who's able to come up with a scenario that makes the Jews gas chamberable, because it's a survival of the fittest, because it's them or us, because Balaq is able to convince the people that they must die, what happens to him? He becomes a king ba'et hahi. At that time, he wasn't really the king. He only became the king because he was willing to champion this cause.
What turned Yitro?
I don't know that they turned on Yitro. I'm not saying that Yitro was involved in this, but it's interesting that you should add Yitro into it. I think this next verse is going to say what the world view is. I'll rephrase it. What the world view was and still is. When we read Torah, it's not to entertain ourselves about stories and drama that had happened. It's so we understand the world that we're currently living in today, Hayom. And what is this next verse? What is his plan? You know, you have a people, let's just talk about it for a second, who it seems are a security danger. It seems like there's so many of them that they may lick us up. What might you do if you were a nation that saw another nation and actually believed that these people who were minding their own business, but let's just say you believed that they were coming to attack you? Go through your memory bank. Let's see, maybe I'll build a fortress. Maybe I will get my army together. Maybe I'll band together with 6 armies and now I'll overpower them. In one sentence, we already got 2 nations together. We didn't even snap our fingers. They were more than happy to join us. And they're not even our friends, the people who are joining us. There's 100 things that you could do to combat a potential threat. If you think it's a military threat, this was not a military threat. I'll just tell you from now, because the action that the king takes, his plan is, and you'll see it in the next verse, Vayishlach Malachim el Bilaam ben Beor Petura. He decides that his plan of attack is going to be to send messengers to Bilaam, the son of Beor and Petura, that's on the Nahar, that's on the riverbank, Likrolo, to call him to say, Hineam. By the way, those exact words, Hineam, is words that Paro uses. Yatsam Mitzrayim. What's missing? Did the people leave Egypt? Or did God take them out of Egypt? It's all in the wording. Tomato, yeah. Guess what? When you're going to say that these people took themselves out of Egypt, now they are a people that is totally against the natural evolution, the natural way of the world. How does the people leave Egypt? How does that happen? Doesn't. But what happens? These people, this is what he's sending. He says, they're covering the eye of the land, like the swarming, paru, vayishritzu, vayirbu, like swarms. You can't even see the land. There's so much, and so many of them. Vehu yoshev mimuli, and he's sitting right opposite me. And what's my plan? Atalechana, I want you to go. Ara et ha'am hazeh. I want you to curse these people because they are stronger than us. And then maybe if you curse them, we will able to smite them and we will able to chase them from the Aretz, from the land. Because I know, says the king, whoever you bless is blessed and whoever you curse is cursed. So let's start with this.
Some kind of a belief, because you don't believe in blessing and curses if you're not.
I'm so happy that you're saying this. So here's the bottom line. Now, since we're pressed for time, I'm going to go very simply and say this. Kings very often believe or want people to believe that they are all powerful. They actually want people to believe that they are gods, like Pharaoh in the Nile. They didn't want anybody to know. He wanted the people to think that he was a god, right? Balak just became king yesterday. But what is his worldview? This is what we're talking about. This is why Parashat Balak is here. Not just for Balak's worldview, but to teach us that this worldview still exists today and be very mindful of it. What is it? The king believes and knows that God might have a plan. He knows that God's plan was to, he's not stupid, like you say. He knows the Jews left Egypt. He knows God had them beat all the other nations in their wake. But what does he think? Why does he think he's smarter than everybody else? Because he thinks that with the use of magic, with the use, I could combat the supernatural with the supernatural. Who was in Pharaoh's chambers at all times? The Khartoumim, the sorcerers. He's always in every scene surrounded by his sorcerers. What was the purpose of that? The purpose was that God is powerful, he's supernatural, and my supernatural agents will be able. The problem with Pharaoh was that his supernatural agents, his magicians, his sorcerers were not able to combat God, and he lost. But, says Balak, this king, wait a minute. Paro was using low-line, second-rate, inferior sorcerers. That was the problem. Had he been smart enough to employ Bilaam, who supposedly is the sorcerer du jour, who's supposedly even stronger and wiser and more powerful than Moshe, then he would have been successful. What is the worldview today that we need to take away? And that is, if we see the reality, if the king sees a reality, he believes that the magicians can change that reality. The reality, his reality, I'll give it to him, his reality was that the people posed a threat and that the people were going to swallow him alive. He believed that magic and sorcery could change that reality. He forgot to carry the one. He forgot to add the one to the equation. He didn't put in the equation, because we see he doesn't mention God at all in any of his propaganda. And yes, says the Torah, had it been just the Jewish people, then he would have been able to decimate us. But because God is on our team, he didn't stand a chance. But it goes further than that. So if we want to say, and maybe we should take a step back and ask, what is our relationship with magic? What is our relationship with blessings, with curses? How do we feel about this? I mean, our community coming from Sephardic Arab countries, living in those countries so many years, we still have some feelings somewhere that maybe there are things that control our destiny. Maybe there are certain numbers that are offensive or protective, like the number 5. I hope I'm not offending anybody. It's not my intent. But many people, Sarah taught me about Muhammad, right? What did you tell me about the 5?
Illiterate, so when they wrote books about him, they each had to sign it like this. So everybody walked around like Muhammad.
Muhammad signed the book with his hand, like this, put his ink, put his hand, that was the 5. So if you wanted to refer to Muhammad, you would do this, and that was his signature, that was his stamp. Of course, we know what's behind also the 5. Many people felt that it wards off, it's your hands doing this, saying what? Muhammad is protecting me. You can't bring any evil my way. I have Muhammad on my side, so to speak. There are many different ways that all of this could be translated. But at the end of the day, what is the Torah's stance on this type of feeling that blessing or curse is in the hands of other people? Watch.
What about the Chamsa?
What about the Chamsa? That's what I'm talking about. The Chamsa is the 5. Chamesh is 5, is the Chamsa, is the hand, which Sarah had taught me was the sign, was the way Muhammad would sign his writings because he was illiterate. So in many countries, it stood for, when they would hold up their hand, they were saying, I am protected by Muhammad, I am protected by the God of Muhammad, any of those types of sayings.
But he didn't know what they were writing if he couldn't read and write himself. How did he know what they were
Maybe he
putting up for him to
just
do?
dictated it. He was dictating what were his supposed prophecies. Forgetting that for a minute, let's go back to this understanding in Parashat Balak. At the bottom of it, at the foundation of it, is a man, a king, who feels that he could control the natural world and its direction based on blessing or curse. He felt maybe the Jews were blessed and instead we need to curse them. And then we need to ask ourselves, how do we feel? How do we react? How do we respond? Or to what extent do we believe that curses or blessings play a role in our ultimate destiny? So I'll answer the last question first.
Vivien, I excuse myself for interrupting, but we have this today with both here and in Israel, where the media and the governments want to take God off the radar screen. So in a way,
we address that. You're right, Gail. You're right. We do have that. It existed back then and it exists today, where we want to cancel God out of the equation. Parashat Balak is going to address that for us. Let me just finish my point and then we'll open up comments for the end, if that's okay.
yes, thank you.
Thank you. So what we would like to see here is, I'd like to show you how, I would love to spend time, but we don't have enough time. I'll give you the cliff notes on how we get from here to what the sorcerer actually says. So between this introduction, where we saw that a person who was a nobody became a king, between that and his sending messengers believing that words or curses would be able to defeat the Jewish people, between that and what actually transpires is a quick little story. I'll give it to you in the fastest form I know how. The messengers come to Bilaam and he says, I can't do anything without consulting God. And he goes to sleep at night because God would come to him at night. And God tells him it's a no-go. He goes back and tells the people, it's a no-go. God said no. And he adds his own little, even if you was to send me the most prominent of the king's messengers and make me promises from here to tomorrow, rewards and money and fame and fortune, I can't go against God's word. Of course, it was a hint for maybe if you send me better messengers, you got a better shot. So of course, the king sees right through that. He sends more important messengers with all kinds of promises and rewards for him. And he goes back, he says, hold on, let me see what God's going to say. As if God changes his mind, because we're going to see in one of the blessings or in one of the oracles that he gives, he says, God is not a man that changes his minds. It's a lesson that he finally learns the hard way. But here at this point, he goes back, bless you, and God says, you can go with them, but on the condition that you speak the words I put in your mouth. And he's more than eager to go. It's his payday. He's so excited. He gets to be a national hero. He gets to be wealthy. He gets fame. He gets everything. He can't wait to go. So much so that he saddles his own donkey. The rabbis say, like Abraham who saddled his donkey to go do an akedah, this evil man was saddling his own donkey because he couldn't wait to go curse the Jewish people so he could be a national hero for Moab and Midian. On the way is the famous story of the talking donkey. I strongly recommend that you read it at home because it's really very entertaining reading. On the way, the donkey crushes his leg. They're going through a narrow path. He's going this way, that way. And Bilaam is whipping his donkey. Finally, the donkey just sits down, buckles under its knees, and it's not moving. And the rider, who is the sorcerer, Bilaam, is whipping him. And the donkey, Vayiftach Hashem et pi ha'aton, it's a very famous verse that is used. God does this miracle. Some of the commentaries go as far as to say that this donkey was created from the very beginning of creation for this purpose. A talking donkey is something that had to have been created before the laws of nature took effect because it's totally against everything we know. And he says, aren't I your donkey who's been faithful to you all of these years? Why are you hitting me? And finally, God opens up Bilaam's eyes and he sees that there's an angel with a cherev shelufa beyado, with a sword outstretched in his hand, looking to, which is a very dangerous path. You can't go if there's a. So he finally understands why the donkey is not moving. He had said, if I had a sword in my hand, I would have killed you, he tells the donkey, until he realizes what the issue is. Regardless, at this point, Bilaam is being a little bit more attuned to the fact that his mission is only to be an emissary for God. That God is sending his angel to make sure one wrong move, and I have my angel down there on the scene to slice your neck if you're not going to say the right thing. So at this point, Bilaam is already a little bit more knowledgeable. I'd like to show you how his oracles transpire and what that means for us today. So even though it's exciting reading, I'm just going to fast forward with you, turn to the top of page 864. It's chapter 23. I should just give you this little background because there is a pattern that takes place here. Before each one of his oracles, he asks the king to prepare 7 bulls and 7 rams as a sacrifice and stand next to them. The commentaries say that that is to parallel the 7 sacrifices that the Avot brought and bring him up at least to the level of the forefathers. But for us today, where I want to take you is in verse 7. Vayisa mashtalo vayomer. And we should know, in case we were doing a academic study of what Bilaam is saying, his statements start with this type of introduction, that he started his parable, he lifts up his words, and he says, and what does he say? And this is, pay close attention. He says, min Aram, from Aram. Where am I? Verse 7. Okay, yeah. So from Aram, meharere kodem. What way I lost it. Min Aram yinacheni Balaq melech Moab. Those are the words I was looking for. From Aram, I was commissioned by Balaq, the king of Moab. I'm saying that slowly because I want you to notice the unraveling. Meaning, when we met Balaq, he was a nobody, and then he became a king. And now in the parables that are going to follow, he's going to start as a king and quickly become a nobody. I want you to notice that in the first 2 parables. So you'll see here. So Balaq, the king of Moab, called me meharere Kedem, either from the mountains of Kedem, which is the east, or from the earliest of places. And what does he tell me? Curse for me, Yaakov, Jacob, Ulecha zo'ama Yisrael, and bring za'am is anger, and bring anger on Israel. What was his job? To curse the people. What is going to happen the first time he opens his mouth? What he's actually going to do is he's going to give an apology to the king who hired him, to tell him, I can't do your bidding. I can't do what you wanted. So in the first time that he's going to open his mouth, Melech, the king of Moab, is going to be disappointed that he can't curse them. You're going to see what happens the next 2 times. It's going to go from bad to worse. And he gives an explanation. He says, Ma ekob lo kabael. How could you expect me to curse he who God has not cursed? Uma is loza Adonai. How can I bring anger to somebody that God is not angry at? Because Merosh Surim, from the beginning, Surim erenu, from the beginning, I see it like rocks. A lot of this, by the way, is poetic, so the words have many, many multiple meanings. But the most famous part of what he says is Hen am levadad yishkon. Not only are they a nation that dwells alone in solitariness, I don't think that's a word, but they are unique. They are not a people that is comparable to any other people. Ubagoyim lo yitchashev. They cannot be compared to any of the other nations. Mimana afad Yaakov. Who has counted the dust of Yaakov or numbered even a quarter? There are people, one of the reasons that you can't even count them or consider them or put them in the same category as the other nations is because you can't even count them. And then he goes on to say, I wish tamut nafshi mot yisharim. I wish my death, my end, utehi acharitik kamohu. What does the sorcerer say? If only, yaret, if only my end was like the end of these people. If I only had waiting for me at the end of days, what these people have waiting for them. So the first time he opens his mouth, basically, not only doesn't he curse the people, he gives an apology and an explanation why these people are uncursable. Now it's written here. We know the Torah doesn't waste any words. These are words that we never would have heard or known about had they not been recorded here. Like I said, we were innocent bystanders minding our own business. But thank God the Torah recorded this so that we could understand many things. What are the words that God puts into the mouths of the people who intend us evil? Are we even aware that the person who intended to come curse us ends up speaking all of these beautiful things about us? Now, at this point, the king is unhappy, but he figures it's still salvageable. We could still fix the problem. If we position Bilaam from another perspective where he sees the Jews from another angle, now we could say the mission isn't completely lost. Okay, he explained why he can't curse them. It's because they're blessed by God, but it's still salvageable. What does he say on the next story? Vayisam Shalom, verse 18. Vayomar. Remember, I told you that's the introductory, so we know that this is what Balak is going to say. He says, Kum Balak. What just happened to the Balak Melech Moav? He's just Balak. You lost your title. And don't think this is lost on the king. The king realizes that a minute ago I was King Balak, and now the sorcerer has the nerve to address me by my first name, just plain Balak. So he's starting to realize that his power, the more, and this is going to be a very big theme, that God had told Abraham, Orarecha arur umvarechecha baruch. Anybody who curses you is going to be cursed. He's now starting to experience that it's not a neutral endeavor, that you try to curse the people, it works or it doesn't. No, if you try to curse the people, what's going to happen to you? It's going to ricochet. It's that iron dome, except with with a bounce factor. The arrows that you shoot are going to bounce back exactly to where they came from, right? That's what we really want to hopefully invent one day, that the missiles go to their place of origin. If they want, I'll give the idea to the, I'm sure they thought of it already. So what does he say? He says, Kum Balak Ushma. What's going on here? Mr. King, who's giving the orders now? Lashon Sivui, the language of command. I'm commanding you, Balak. Kum, up, Shma, listen. Ha'azina, I want you to listen to me, Mr. Ben Sipor. I'm not even calling you Balak anymore. You became a nobody. And then he says what we had seen. Lo Ishel. God is not like a man, that he's going to be deceitful by kazev, or that he should yitnachem, that he should change his mind. Whatever he says, or I should say it the other way, amar velo asa, what God says, he's going to do. V'diber lo yikomenu, he's not a person that's going to speak and not have it come to be. And what does he say? Hine, behold, and whenever we see the word behold, we know that this is absolutely God speaking. I hine barech lakachti. I have taken upon myself the role. What's happening here? The messenger that the king hired to be the cursor is now admitting that the job, by taking the job, he actually took the job of doing what?
Blessing.
Of blessing. And guess what? I'm not going to contradict what I was hired to do. And guess what else? I don't see any avon, I don't see any avon, any sin in Yaakov. And I don't see anything perverse in Yisrael. And guess what? God is with them, and God is Tiruat Melech Bo. They have the They're heralded with the king, who is God. So this is not a people. And what is he doing? Now, not only isn't he, like the first time, not cursing the people because they're uncursable, what is he doing? He's now blessing the people. And that is going to get the king even angrier. And he says, you're going to see, hold on. I want you to see just one more verse, verse 22. El motzi am mimitzrayim. You thought that they left Egypt themselves? It was God who took them out of Egypt. And he goes on to say, Kilo nachash beYaakov, this is for us. You know what their strength is? Their strength isn't with divinations or sorcery, lo kasam, or magic, beYisrael. Ule Yisrael ma pa'ael. The whole idea and the whole strength of Israel is El. Hen am kelaviyakum. They're a nation that's going to rise like a lavi is a baby lion. They're going to start out like a baby because that's what we were. We left Egypt. We were like in our infancy. In other words, in modern day, they're just getting warmed up. You think you're afraid of these people? They're still like a baby cub. You wait and see. They are going to roar and rise like an ari, like a lion. And then here's the scary part, which is lo yishkav. They are not going to rest until they consume their prey. V'dam chalalim yishteh. And they are going to drink the blood of their people that they've demolished. These are very strong words. So what does Balak says? What does Balak say? I asked you to curse them. If you weren't going to curse them, that's one thing. But you didn't have to bless them. And so here we go again. And he says, okay, he still doesn't realize that he should cut his losses. And he tries one more time. This third time is going to prove devastating. You know, they say that there were 4 parables in total, but it could be divided as 7, because 7 times by Yisama Shalom, it's going to have this introduction. So we have 2. I'll just give you the third one quickly, because in the third one is where the king is going to say what Sonia says, enough. I'm taking the mic from you. I'm unplugging it. I don't want to hear, please stop. What does he say the third time around? The third time you'll see it in verse 2, Vayisa Bilaam et Enav. He's Vayisa Mashalo in verse 3. He lifts up and he says, you can read it in the English to save time. Now, who's speaking? By the way, he was hired by the king. So the first time it was the king of Moab, Balaq, king of Moab. The second time it was plain old Balaq. You know what's happening in the third time? Who's Balaq anyway? He's not even in the story anymore. You're such a nothing and you're such a nobody, and you've been unraveled so much so that by now it's not even about you anymore. It's the words of Bilaam, the son of Beor, who has an open eye. In other words, you are so lost. Your eyes are closed. You don't see what's right in front of you. And when I started to say that they take 2 different trajectories, Balaq is going to find his way completely off the cliff. He's not going to recover. Bilaam, it seems, is going to learn from his experiences. He starts to learn, his eyes are open. He hears a donkey speaking. He starts to process and to recognize that God is the one who curses and God is the one who blesses. And before I go any further with what he says, I just want to make the point of today, which is, to the extent, it's very important, to the extent that we believe that other people have the ability to curse us, to that extent, they have the ability to curse us. I'm going to repeat it because it's so important. If you're a believer that Sorcerers and magicians have power in this world. You know what you just did? You gave them the power. You empowered them. And that's, I believe, what God was saying back to Abraham, back here in Balak. Those who curse you will be cursed. Those who bless you will be blessed. But the reverse of that, the lesson that I think Parashat Balak is here to teach us is, if you believe that other humans have the ability to curse you, you will be cursed. And if you believe, no, it doesn't go the other way. And if you believe, I'll just keep it with the Balak because it's mostly about curses. If you believe that humans supersede God's will, you lost. And what does that do for us? If we want to say this is not a parasha of Bilaam or Balak, they're not here anymore, but I'm reading it this week. I have to have, with undying faith, the knowledge and the belief that who controls me? Who's the ultimate deciding factor in my life and in the way my history plays itself out? To the extent that I believe that other people have control, that what other people say have a control on me, it's very scary stuff. But if you believe that another human has the ability to give you a curse, then guess what? Then you will believe that, and you will be saying, without uttering a word, that that person has more power than God. And if you say that, you just lost your protexia. You just created a hole in your personal iron dome. And if you want to be a people who has an iron dome constantly, then you have to know that who's your iron dome? God. And could anybody penetrate that? If he is your general, if he is the head of your army, if he is the one who's calling the shots, then what do we care what anybody else does or says? It's meaningless. But believe it or not, this parasha is here because God knows human tendencies. And he knows that we fail and we falter. And sometimes as humans, we feel the need to put our fate and our destiny in the hands of other humans. And I'm not saying, because I've been asked this in the past, if you need a doctor, of course, God put that intelligence in the world for your help. I'm not saying that God's going to solve everything and you're patur from trying to help yourself. We must help ourselves to the extent that God has put help in the world for us. But as far as our ultimate destiny, it's not in the hands of other people's slander. It's not in, you could read it in the paper, you could be bothered by it, but you should sleep at night reading more than ever Parashat Balak, because they could say what they want. Ele barechev, ele basusim. They could have their chariots, they could have their horses, they could have their incantations, they could have their divinations. If we forget the rest of that verse, ve'anachnu b'shem Hashem nashir, well, how do we sing? We sing with God's name on our lips, and that's all we need. And that's, I believe, one of the strong messages, because what happens to those people? What has happened to every society and every nationality that has tried to destroy the Jewish people? Where is Mitzrayim today? Where is Balak today? He's not a king. He's not even Balak. He's done for. His name is erased. You get erased from the history book. You try to erase us, what happens to you? You become erased. That should fortify us. That should give us strength to move on every day with this belief. And I'll end with the last thing that, because it's beautiful what he says at the end. Bilaam speaks up and he says, I myself am guilty of having had closed eyes. But now that my eyes are open, I could hear what God is saying. So profound what he's saying. If you lose one sense, you lose all your senses. If you don't see God, not only don't you see him, you don't see him, you don't hear him, you don't feel him, he's gone. He's out of the picture. One sense is unused, you're in trouble. I just don't know if I muted myself. Give me 1 second. One sense is gone, they're all gone. And what does he say? This is very famous. Ma tovu ohalecha Yaakov mishkenotecha Yisrael. We say this where? Under the chuppah. The weddings that we go to, it's our custom to say, Ma tovu ohalecha Yaakov. Your tents, Yaakov, mishkenotecha, the places that you dwell, those are considered tov. But it's saying something more. Your ohel, what's an ohel? An ohel is a place for Shekhinah, like ohel moed. If you make your home a place that is an ohel, like ohel moed, that the Shekhinah, then it becomes mishkenotecha Yisrael. Then your ohel becomes a place of Shekhinah, a place of holiness. If where you live is a place that's constantly bringing in God's Shekhinah, then you have the ultimate protection and you have it as a constant. This is what we're telling the new couple who's starting their own home. Make sure you bring God into your stories. By the time he finishes this utterance, this oracle, the king is furious. He says, enough is enough. I'm not paying you. Go home. You're done. And what does he give him? What does Bilaam do? He gives him a freebie. He throws him an unsolicited, thank you. He unsolicited, and this is where I want to end my class, on page 872, verse 15. He says, this is what's going to be, verse 14, Be'acharit hayamim. This is what's going to be at the end of days. How gorgeous is what he's about to say. Hold on to this. Why? Because while we're fearing today's news and tomorrow's threats, we should remember yesterday's promises for the final day. We have to remember this. This is our protection. If we bring God into our every waking moment and calculation, what does he say? He says, I shall see him, verse 17. I shall see him, but not now. I shall look at him, but it is not near. A star has issued from Jacob, and a scepter bearer has fallen from Israel. He shall pierce the nobles of Moab and undermine all the children of Shet. It goes on to say, you think you're safe, Balaq. You're safe now. You're safe today. You may not see immediate results or harm that you caused just now, but in the end of days, the ultimate finale is Edom is going to be a conquest. Seir is going to be a conquest. Israel's going to attain success. And the family of Jacob is going to rule and destroy the entire city. What did we do? We saw Amalek, and we said Amalek was the first to attack. But what's going to happen? His end is going to be total destruction. These are words that we have to commit to memory. We have to live our lives every day saying there's a promise out there. And the promise out there says very, very clearly that all the other nations are going to be forever, this is how it ends, that are going to be forever destroyed. Vehu ad oved, forever, they're going to be lost. And with that, Bilaam picks himself up, dusts himself off, have a nice day, and he walks away. For us today,
Vivien, Yashikara, God bless you and your family. What gives Balaq the merit to have Ruth come from him?
what gives Balaq the merit? I'll say two things. The Torah never paints anybody as all good or all bad. You want to talk about Ruth, you could also talk about the sons of Korach that make it into the Tehillim. So there is hope, and there is the ideal, and there is the concept of teshuvah. And I'm not going to bring the iniquities of our own greats who have faltered and failed and later on come to be the fathers and the grandfathers of the greatest kings and Mashiach. So nobody is perfect. I don't know that Balak's story is here just to tell us about Balak himself. I think Balak's story is here to tell us nobody controls us. Nobody's ideas and nobody's intentions can harm us as long as we understand that Shomer Yisrael, that the one who protects us is God himself. And if we lose that even for a second, and if we allow ourselves to be victims to what we see in the newspapers, and we know that they're not going to say that God took us out of Egypt or that God helped us beat the Emori. It's not their way. It's not for them to do. We're fooling ourselves if we ever believed for a minute that these other nations are going to accredit God for what he does. So what do we have to do? The same way God comes to our aid and to our defense, we have to come and defend the institution that God is the Borei Olam, that God is the one who creates, that God is the one who gives blessings, that God is the one who gives curses. And we have to be steadfast, and it's not easy. And that's what the world wants. The world wants to separate us from our God. They want to have us believe that there are intonations and there are incantations that could dispel the trajectory of the world. Parashat Balak, I believe, is here to tell us, if you go down that road, you will be erased like Balak. You will fall off the cliff. You will not be heard of. Your name will not be in existence. But maybe it's also here to tell us that there is hope, that a person like Bilaam was able to have his eyes opened up. And maybe it's our job here, from the behavior and the way that we conduct ourselves, to be ambassadors and emissaries of the true God and say, we are children of the God of morality, of the God of kindness, the God of chesed, the God of compassion. And maybe we will be the ones who will be opening up the eyes of the other non-believers. Whatever it is, I always say this because I know Gail's going to chime in, so I'll say it both before she does. It's our job to worry first about how we see ourselves and how we see our God. Before we go out there to teach other nations a lesson, we have to make sure that we understand the lesson ourselves. We have to make sure that our eyes are open, so that our ears could be open, so that all of our senses could bring in this special Shekhinah into our homes, into our tents, into our communities, into our families, into our shuls, into our world ultimately. And I'd like to end by saying, since we dedicated our learning today to the elevation of the neshama of Mrs. Lily Safra, she played her role, she did her part, she opened every shul door that she was able to open, she opened every bet midrash, every school, every mikveh, wherever there was an opportunity for her to inject the God of the Jewish people into the nation of the Jewish people, she did that. And for that zechut, teheh nishmata של רבי זרוע חיים. Amen. Yes.
Thank you so much, Vivien. So good to see you.
From that Yashad El.
Right.
And I'm noticing in this parasha that every time Balak spoke, he's referred to Israel, to the Israel as Ha'am or the Kahal. And when Bilam spoke, he used the Israel word.
Yes, because Balak, the king, wanted to eliminate the Yashad El part of it, and Bilam in his teshuvah is bringing in God. You bring God in and he brings you back. And he survives this. We never hear about Balak after this. But Bilaam goes on to be known in the history books as one of the greatest, and I should really have ended with this. Why would the Gemara go and say that Bilaam was one of the greatest prophets? Not because he started out that way, because despite all of his journeys, he came to recognize and realize God, which is 10 times greater than having had it to begin with.
It's ironic that the Parashat's not named him.
It's called Balak. I know, I was thinking that myself, but so is Noach and so is Yitro. And so maybe we don't have any chapters named other than you want to say Chaye Sarah, but the people that we're named after, you know what I'm saying? Oh, we have Pinchas. So I don't know how I feel about it. I take that back. I don't know how I feel about it. I have to think about it. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us. This is where we'll be, God willing, Mondays at 11. I can't believe I'm seeing you here on this side of the bridge. That's great. That's great. Thank you.
Great to see you. Vivien.
Thank you. Take care, everybody. Have a beautiful day. Oh, I didn't.